When did you start working for McMullens?
1984. So 30 odd years now.
And what was it like here in the early days then, before your time?
Before my time, what I always remember is the love and passion of the workforce, really. Right from a young age, my father introduced me to the brewery at large events, because we would have garden parties at my father's home, and we would have to be on parade, all the children, my brother and I, and we were told to go around and make sure that we made everyone feel welcome. And the people I met were so kind to me. Immediately I felt, wow, this is quite something. We are very lucky. We are in a business which mostly deals with people, and it's a people business. So that's what I remember from my very early days. But I didn't immediately work for McMullens. Before that, I wanted to be a farm manager. Goodness knows where I was going to get the farm from, but that was my original thoughts. And then I went into selling property in London, and then I got a lovely call from my father saying, darling, next weekend I'd like to talk about maybe the possibility of you joining the brewery. And I thought, wow, that's quite exciting. Hadn't really thought about it. And we had a long conversation, and that really started me off thinking about how I'm going to join. And I had to go and find expertise outside. So I worked for Bullman's Cider Company for a couple of years. I was a sales rep, had a patch from sort of Basingstoke down to Southampton. Sold cider, Strongbow and Woodpecker cider, to all sorts of clubs and pubs. And then we moved down to, my wife and I moved down to Herefordshire and worked at head office in the marketing department, and met all sorts of lovely, and again I picked up the family ethos there, because H.B. Bulmer was a family cider company at that time, before it very sadly got sold off. And then I worked for various other breweries. So I went and worked in the managed house side for Whitbread Company, as it was then. Worked for Courage in the big brewery on the M4. Do you remember that one near Reading, which did all the Foster's lager? I then worked for Eldridge Pope, which very sadly now has been bought up. Got bought up about 30 years ago, 25 years ago. I worked for a few other companies like Tetley's up in Southport. So I got a very good feeling of what the business was all about. And my main emphasis at that time was on free trade business, which is really selling to those places that we didn't own, but we wanted to sell our beer to. So places like hotels, clubs, golf clubs, all those sort of things. And I remember we used to have 6 reps and an area manager. And in those days, my goodness, we all drank in the clubs, on our way round. And my father, there's a story about my father with one of the lovely old reps for, I think it was for Lang's whiskey or something. And he used to, this lovely old rep used to say, your father used to get in the car and he put his feet up on my dashboard, smoke a cigarette, and we'd have about 6 or 7 whiskies going round these clubs and pubs. And in those days, people didn't care about drink and drive, which was appalling. When I first arrived, the drayman would almost have a half in every pub they'd delivered to. And thank goodness, within 5 years, I put a stop to all that, because we're now a dry brewery and have been so for 35 years, 30 odd years, thank goodness. If you've got people drinking too much, rushing around in forklift trucks and big lorries, it doesn't really work.
Why Hertford?
Well, it's funny to say that. My original name was McMullen.
Right.
And way back in the 1650s, we used to live in southern Argyllshire, and we're a member of a clan of the McMullen clan. And we got into bed with another larger clan, could have been the Camerons or Campbells, and we thought probably at that time that was quite a good move. But the point is that one of the McMullens rowed with that clan, so much so that in those days you didn't really survive a row. In fact, quite a lot of his family were killed, and he had to hightail out of southern Argyllshire and go all the way across the sea to Northern Ireland, northwest coast of Northern Ireland. And that's where the name was changed to McMullen. And it was in 1790 that William McMullen, who was rather like a factor to the Marquis of Downshire, looked after his lands, related in some way with the Cecil family, we all know that lives Hatfield House. And he came over with the Marquis to help him with his lands over here. And it was just complete luck that he settled in Hertford. And from there, dear old William had quite a large family, and he had Peter. Peter survived all that era. He didn't start out too well. He had a criminal record for poaching. He also was sacked from his apprenticeship, which was for a cooper who made barrels, I think it was for negligence and tardiness, which is not very good. So whenever I talked to my poor children when they were very young about their school reports, I always said, don't worry, you know, Peter started pretty badly, but came good in the end, because he managed to marry a super lady called Sarah Manning, and she was about 10 years older than him. And she took him by the scruff of the neck, said, if we're going to make a decent life together, you're going to have to pull your finger out and start working properly. And he did. And he invented AK for us, which is our longest brand. He also bought our first pub, which was the Greyhound in Bengio. And he landed up, I think, dying in about, gosh, when was it? 1840s or something, having owned a little brewery and also owned 5 pubs. So well done, Peter. That wasn't a bad start. So to answer your question, really, I think it probably was around, first pint brewed was around sort of 1830s, yeah.
What kind of transport did you have in the good old days?
Oh my goodness. Well, of course, my dear father, John McMullen, he remembers as a child the horses were still delivering locally. And we used to prefer greys. And some of our pictures, I mean, I wish I could find more pictures of our grey horses. And we have grey horses now pulling our old cart around Hertford, and we'll go to town centres and do samplings. But a horse dray used to be able to go about 7 miles out and 7 miles back in a day. Their day started very early, about, I would think, 5 o'clock in the morning, because of course you've got to rub your horse down, get the tackle together, get your beer on board, you've got to feed the poor old thing, and then off you go. The story goes that they used to have a little pin of ale on the back for them, and they had a bit of beer for the horse as well. They drink the pin, the drayman, and fall asleep, more than likely on the way home, because the dear old horse used to know the way home, and that was fine. And they'd probably nudge in on the way and then be all right. So that's how it used to be delivered.
Do you still keep the horses?
We don't keep them ourselves. I've got a wonderful family, William Sheen, who's out Braintree way, who keeps a couple of lovely greys for us, and we use them as a sort of PR tool. For example, we had a brewery and music festival in the yard only last weekend, and the horses came and did a trip around the town. It's rather nice for people to see. And at Christmas, I dress up as Father Christmas on Christmas Eve, and we send out an email to all the local schools saying, if there's any child that's had a rotten year, you know, things have gone wrong for them, please put them on the list. and we'll take them round and do trips. And we do about 7 trips. I'm exhausted by the end of the Christmas Eve. But what I do have is, you remember those little gold coins you have in, yeah? So I tell the children to hurl them at anyone they want to, and then I hand out our strong Christmas ale in bottle to all the poor parents that look exhausted and time for, I said, that'll put them to sleep. If you give them a nip and take a nip yourself that night you'll sleep very well. Afforded.
The basement over there is fantastic. What was it used for originally?
What, the cellars?
Yeah.
In the old brewery?
Yeah, in the old brewery.
Oh gosh, that was there for storing all the barrels. We termed filling barrels as racking barrels. When they were racked, they come down a sort of helter-skelter thing, which was pretty noisy. And I remember working down there because my dear father made me do every single job in the brewery for at least a couple of weeks before I could start for real. And one of the jobs was going in the cellar with a lovely chap called Chris Sweeney. And I'll never forget, in those days, 36-gallon barrels were still being used. Now, health and safety wouldn't allow you to do that, too heavy. But he could spin them into the right place across the cellar. It would take me about half an hour to kick this thing and roll it and it'd go off in one direction. And because he worked and so skilled, he could do that. It wasn't his only job, he worked in something else as well. But it was really there to store all this lovely beer in the basement. Conditions were perfect.
The new Hertford Arts Hub gallery building, what was that used for originally? It obviously wasn't a glazed.
Which one was that?
Where the art gallery is, over there, with the glass front.
In the Sainsbury's?
No, before there, just here.
Oh.
In Hartham Lane.
I think that would be just in that sort of lower level bit. That was where all the horses were stabled up. And if you look, there's some wonderful vents at the top which allowed the thing to breathe. So the wind would take, and you remember the heat of all the horses in there, and that would have been quite a place to work. Think of the smell, the evocative smell of horses, leather, and ale. What a place to work. I mean, I would think pretty hard work. I mean, my great-great-grandfather loved his horses so much that the story goes that he used to get everyone in the brewery yard for their increase in pay. And they come up to his desk, he'd be in his, probably in his uniform or whatever, and he would say, well done, so-and-so, here's your increase in pay. And one year, this poor chap came up and looked for his pay, and he said, no, I'm not giving you an increase in your pay. I saw you badly slap one of my horses, so good day. And he loved his horses probably more than his men, but he didn't like them being abused.